about why I'm here as a prelude or a lead-in to the framework and to the actual substance of the conference. When we look at the economy and how it operates, in my 30-some years in anti-poverty program activity, we've got a global economy, the General Motors and international banking universe. We have Al and I both have master's degrees in international business, so we watch with interest and discuss these trillions of dollars sluicing around, chasing a quarter of a percentage point of interest, extra 2 yen and exchange rates and all that insanity up there. Doesn't have anything to do with the real world anymore. There's a national economy, mostly government-related, where I actually earn most of my money, working with the federally funded Head Start program and other, the Department of Agriculture, Rural Development Agency, the Empowerment Zone Enterprise Community. And you look at authors like William Julius Wilson and Jeremy Rifkin and Charles Barnett and others who say that we've got, even in the U.S., somewhere between 10 and 20 million adults who are looking for work in this dollar economy, and it's just not there. So I'm separating here what you do in the dollar in terms of finding real work for people at real dollar levels and so forth is getting worse, and if the trend lines, as I perceive them, are correct, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So where's the start of a major set of problems if you don't do it with dollars? So then I started hearing about people like E.F. Schumacher, and I started hearing about this guy Linton up in Canada, and as I sort of worked my way into this, discovered many of you who are actually already doing and had been doing, in some cases for 10 or more years, activity, particularly in this corner of the universe, that looks at what I think I do best, and what I do most, certainly what I do most, is I learn. And I learn things. And I do this by going to conferences, I sponsor conferences, I do workshops, I hire people to write books, I write books, and I'm just sort of out there churning at any given money at all, some of which do make money. At any given point in time, I got about 20 projects going. About 10 of them are dead bang losers that cost me a fortune. 4 or 5 of them maybe I break even on if I'm lucky, and 3 or 4 I actually earn a living on, and that's the money I make over there I use to finance things that I don't. Our program doing extremely well on the whole team building, moving away from hierarchical command and control organizations to more flat team-based operations. I got a great project in its 3rd year now I'm doing with it. Those projects are financially really paying off and enabling me to do other projects that don't pay off. Now we still have about another 25 people somewhere out on the bridge. A whole group of people in Mendocino that are doing this. There's a group of people from up around Santa Rosa who are doing this. And as it turned out, Harry Dahl, that this was something that his community action agency really ought to take a look at, or to convince CDC that this is something, hey, there's something here that may be a valuable add-on strategy to what you were doing in Santa Cornelia, Florida. The rural sociologists will rule again. You know, they had a great bubble back in the 30s, and are coming back around again. They're going to take over the world. So you got the stuff going on in community building, and you got the stuff in economic development strategy and so forth. A lot of things. Key your presentations to the people in the audience for whom this is brand new. And how many people here do we have for whom this stuff is brand new? That would be useful to know. Okay, so we see maybe a little more than half or 2/3 of the audience. The subject matter is brand new, and so we're trying to inform them and bring them up to speed on this, on the different approaches, strategies, methodologies, and so forth. I asked the speakers and presenters, start at 0, work your way up from there, and eventually we'll be looking for lively interchange between you on the nuances and subtleties of all this stuff, but don't leave us amateurs and beginners behind. Start easy and kind of layer us up and make sure we're tracking you to get up there. Okay.
Warn you that because of the weather out there, there's a whole bunch of people coming down from Mendocino and Sonoma County who have not quite made it here, and including those folks from Marin County, and Bernard Batier, our next speaker, hasn't arrived yet. So there might be a slight delay on that. But before we get to him, we're going to introduce Michael Linton because he's going to talk about and get us started with a game that he's developed. Then we'll follow Mr. Letier's presentation with a panel presentation on the different types of local currency, the different models, and then after our noon break, we'll get down to the real nitty-gritty as to how these different currencies function. And then we'll have some breakouts dealing with a variety of different aspects of local currency. Jennifer, did you have...
Tim Cohen Mitchell is going to...
Okay, so Tim is going to take care of that. Originally, we had planned for someone else to do that presentation, and Tim, thank you for stepping in for that. And then for tomorrow...
Million of heads, and we're all in our individual heads. And the thing about a game is that it's a very powerful interactive process. It's also been our experience that it's the most effective way of getting through the big hump with community currencies, which is comprehension. Most of you will probably recall it took a few days, weeks, maybe longer to get your heads around this process, and then you started beating on your neighbor's heads, and your neighbors got very fed up with you. And the thing we've found with this game is that if you can get people into a room, 20 people, more, less, about 60 or 70% of them will understand enough after they've played these games to join your network, no matter what it is, whether it's a script one or a Let's type or whatever. So we thought it'd be a useful background for the conference to put the game into the process and take you through it.
Point or at a local list.
How does this thing work? Oh, this must be high tech. I've been asked to talk about the strategic nature of community currencies or complementary currencies, as I prefer to talk about. In order to do that, I'll cover the following 6 topics. By the way, can everybody see this? First of all, we'll be talking about what's happening to, quote-unquote, normal money. What's happening to the national currency system. There's a lot of news lately about that, and I think there are deep reasons why there's news. And we'll hear more news in the future. And it relates, it directly gives a strategic value to what we're doing here today. Then I'll answer the question to the gentleman who raised that little piece of green paper and said, what is this thing anyway? So I'll try to address that question, which is in fact usually not asked. There are lots of people talking about what money does. Very few has talked about what it is, and there's a significant distinction there. Then we'll talk about the topic of today, emergence of community currencies. And in fact, the process that we're dealing with is worldwide, is very systematic, and is much more sophisticated than it has ever been before. I say it, in fact, it's a re-emergence. It has happened before. In this country, there were 5,000 community currencies, local currencies in the 1930s, for example, which are all being forgotten in the dust of history now. But I think this is not the first time they reappear, although they appear differently this time. And we'll see also why they're different. Then we'll make some distinctions between different kinds of money systems. I mean, some systemic differences. Not only what the national currency are, so also the different nature, the different types of community currencies. And what are they different about? And the way they're issued, in the way they actually smoothen the transaction between people. The purpose of that is, in fact, to make a map. The purpose of the focus of my presentation will be to provide you with the information necessary to map different systems, so you know what system can do for what purpose. And finally, I'll answer the question that I was asked initially. What is the strategic role for community currency? I think we need a bit of background here in order to be able to meaningfully address that issue. If there are any questions from understanding, please interrupt. If there are questions of fundamental nature, let's talk about it at the end. I don't want to overrun too much my time.
Speak a little louder.
Right, will do. I presume this doesn't amplify, is that what it is?
No, it doesn't.
I see. Okay, I thought it did. Well, something is happening with money, with the official money system. And in order to understand what's happening now, we really have to look at what there have been three major shifts over the last 20 years. The first one goes back to good old Nixon, who in August 1971 detached the dollar from gold. That actually created a floating exchange environment, an environment in which the national currencies can now freely move depending on market demand. The second thing that happened was actually in sequence, Thatcher and then Reagan and then Baker. In other words, deregulation. Thatcher was initially starting the deregulation strategy in England. It became fashionable with Reagan as well. But what happened is that there are a whole series of new actors that could do new things with currency after this deregulation. Say before this time period, which is the 1980s, you would not be able to go to, say, a broker and say, well, you know, I want to buy $1 billion worth of Deutsche Mark. They would say, what for? After this, you don't have to say what for. You just do it. And everybody was happy to provide the service for you. The Baker plan is referring to the then Secretary of Treasury, Baker, who in fact installed this deregulation strategy in 13 different developing countries. The 13 key developing countries that the United States was negotiating the debt crisis with of the 1980s. And that actually exported the process on a global level. The whole, what happened here and in England, started happening worldwide. And finally, and I would say certainly not least, one could even make an argument that the technology is the driving force, and some people do, like Kurtzman claims that the third point is in fact explaining the whole thing. I believe there's more to it than that. But fundamentally, what has happened is money is living in cyberspace. And when you talk about cyber economy and cyber commerce, it is just the rest of the economy catching up where money has been for the last 10 or 20 years. Money is living there quite happily, very smoothly, for quite a long time. In fact, the first applications of computers were invariably accounting. And I claim that every one of your, whatever money you have, the bulk of it is electronic today. You have a few bills in your pocket, but the rest is in a bank account or in a brokerage house. Where is that? In a computer. So it's just being shifted around from computer to computer. And this has been the way it has been systematically. Now it also has happened worldwide. The first fully integrated market, 24 hours, around the clock, absolutely smooth. Whenever London closes, New York picks up. Whenever New York picks up, Hong Kong or Japan picks on the ring, and Lund closes it up. 24 hours around the clock. You don't have that in stock. I mean, you know, when you want to buy a stock of an American company, you better do it when the New York market is open. You know, they won't going to sell it to you in Japan. So there is a difference in nature here. That perfectly smooth market, perfectly open market, however, is creating problems that were not quite expected. Supposedly, they were going to create stability. In fact, what they're doing is creating instability. And we'll see why. More important even is the fact that there has been a massive power shift as big as the French Revolution, where nobility kind of got in trouble and the nation state came into being. Now, the nation state is in trouble, and the global financial markets are in charge. Cavill, who is the head of President Clinton's campaign in 1992, made the following remark. He said, if there is reincarnation, I used to believe I wanted to come back as a president or as the Pope. Now, I want to come back as a financial market. You can scare anybody. Okay? And I think it's true. The policeman on a global level is currently the financial market. And this includes policing the United States. There are certain policies that will not be tolerated. And when they're not tolerated, you have a run on the currency. The interest rates go up, and you better look for cover. Finally, the third thing that has happened out of this process is the global casino. I call it the global casino because this is definitely Reno or Las Vegas casino. Not even on the map. These are sailing volumes per day in billions. Okay? Now, in 1974, you always had a bit of what's called speculation, speculative activity, as opposed to the real economy. The real economy is when you buy and sell foreign exchange for importing goods, for buying a factory, for going as a tourist to Mexico. Whatever you do, services or goods, you're going to have to buy foreign exchange in order to import or export your products. Well, that is what I call the real economy. Some speculation is useful. Speculation is, in fact, an activity that provides depth in the market and liquidity that otherwise wouldn't exist. So in other words, it provides some stability. However, what has been happening is that the tail is wagging the dog. I claim that a tail is a useful thing for a dog. A bit of sugar is useful in a diet. But when it reaches 98%, we may have a problem. Something is off balance, right? And that's what's happened. The current volume of foreign exchange per day is over 2 trillion. Yes?
Could you just quickly define speculation?
Speculation is buying and selling of currency for the sole purpose of making a profit on the exchange, on the rate of exchange changes. I'm only buying it because I'm hoping that it will go up. I'm only selling it because I'm hoping it will go down.
Just buying currency.
Buying and selling currency without any intention of doing anything except selling it again if you buy it. In other words, buying and selling, trading the currency. There's now $2 trillion per day. Now, just to give you an idea, if you had a printing machine that prints $1 bill per second in your garage, it would be a nice thing to have, right? No, $60 per minute, 2,600 hour. So it's kind of like a minute, make a nice living, right? Does anybody have an idea how much time this printing machine should run in order to print $2 trillion, which is the volume of foreign exchange per day, in one day? Is it the American Revolution? Is it Saruman? Is it Jesus Christ? Is it Cro-Magnon? Anybody have a guess? Well, Cro-Magnon is about 50,000 BC, all right? This is 62 million years ago. We are in the Cretaceous period with dinosaurs. It's a dinosaur that started your printing machine. And this is a volume per day, understand? All right? This means that the entire GNP of the United States is turned to the market in 3 days. The GNP per year is turned in the market per day. All right? we are off the map. This, fun?
What you just said about the GNP, the whole GNP.
The whole GNP of the United States is about 6 trillion today. So the entire, per year, the yearly GNP is 6 trillion. That is everything that's being bought and sold in this country. Every piece of bread, everything, you know, every haircut, every service is together in a whole year, okay, is turned over in 3 days.
Worldwide.
Worldwide. Yeah. By the way, they're talking about probably half a dozen markets doing development. Now, why is this happening? Well, simply because foreign exchange is now a new asset class. You used to have 3 major asset classes. You had real estate, you had bonds, and you had stocks. And that's where you put your money when you want to save it. There's now a 4th one, which is currency. Money itself is now an asset class. It is an asset class which has very low transaction costs. It's about 20 times cheaper to do a large volume in foreign exchange than in any other thing, bonds or stocks. Not to speak of real estate, which is much higher. It's very deep. In other words, that means you can get in and out without creating a ripple. It's $1 billion to buy in a stock, you're going to drive the stock up. And when you go to sell it, you're going to drive it down. So $1 billion here is just drop in the bucket. You can get in and out, no problems. That's where the importance of the deepest market is. And finally, volatility is the key to profitability. The nightmare is no volatility. Because then you're buying a stock, buying currency, and nothing happens. Terrible. You know. But. So the consequence of this, according to Paul Volcker, the ex-chairman of the Federal Reserve, he called it the growing substituency for instability. It used to be that people with a lot of money were on the conservative side. They were siding with government on the issue of money stability. This has now changed. You know, there's one pool, very significant pool of money, that actually doesn't like stability. The consequence is crashes. And I find it very interesting that American newspapers don't talk about crashes. They talk about the Mexican problem. They talk about the crisis in Asia. What has happened in Asia is a crash. As big and as clear a crash as the United for the Asians. I mean, let's call it what it is. What they really are meaning is systemic instability. It's something which I, in fact, have not been surprised by. I've been talking about that for about 3-4 years now. So the Asian crisis is just on steroids. I think the next one is probably going to be in Europe for the spring. Now, Michel Cambesu, who was the governor of the Central Bank of France before coming 3 times president of the IMF, called the Mexican crisis, and he said that before the Asian thing, the first monetary crisis of the 21st century. What he's really saying is, this is a different animal. This is a different animal because what we're dealing with is systemic risk on a global level. The reason the United States cobbled together $50 billion to save Mexico is not because they love Mexico. It's because without us, the whole system would unravel. So, that's why it is. My personal opinion is that we're going to see a meltdown with about a 50-50 chance in the next 5, perhaps 10 years. I'm being optimistic, yes.
Now, when you come up with that figure, how are you anticipating this?
I'm being, in fact, optimistic.
Right. But what
Many
about
experts,
that-
I'm trying not to push any finance.
Well, I understand that, but have you, is that at all variable, whether the common currency in Europe does favorably or?
The European single currency is a fiat currency just like anybody else's currency. In other words, if the dollar, the meltdown on a global level would be a dollar crisis. Okay? If you have a dollar crisis, the system is gone. Because it's the linchpin. Every single currency in the world is expressed in terms of the dollar. So you can't have the rest of the system still working if the linchpin is gone. It's like saying the yard is gone. and you start to measure, you're in trouble. You know. So, in other words, the euro will not survive if there's a crisis in the dollar, the euro will rest. The euro, the European currency that you're talking about. Now, if you take any economics textbook, they will tell you a lot about what money does. They will say money is a way, they say, is a standard of value. They will say it is a medium of exchange, it is a store of value. You can add a few other things. I'm adding, for example, it's a tool of empire. It is a tool of speculation. Okay? So, that's what they normally say. But all these definitions are typically saying what it does. The standard of value is something it does. What it is, in fact, is an agreement. And it lives in the space of, say, political parties, nationalities, marriage. In other words, it's a very real space, but it's completely in our heads. There's nothing out there. Okay? This is completely a man-made construct, money. So it's an agreement within a community, and a community can be a bunch of soldiers on the front. It can be a group of friends playing cards. It can be a nation state which agrees to use a particular currency, called a national currency. It can be a community that decides to do that. It can be a virtual community. In other words, it could be a global thing with, 500 people that never meet each other, all spread over the world. Now, the interesting thing about I should have said that earlier, one illusion that's typically happening in the magic of money is that people believe it's a thing. Now, if you take this glass or this pen in your pocket and you go to a desert island, you're going to have this pen and this glass in your pocket. You have the thing in your pocket. You take money. You take any money you want. Dollars, credit cards, gold bars, Swiss francs, Monopoly, whatever. Okay? And you go on your desert island, what do you have? Metal, paper, but no money. Plastic, but the money is something that only exists within a community and therefore is not a thing. It's part of the space of agreement. Is that clear? Because that's very important. By looking at it, by understanding what it is, it also shows you that you just can agree. If this group or this table agrees on something, well, you have a currency. It's as simple as that. Now, of course, you better agree on something that works. And we have Michael, among others, who is perfectly happy to explain how that would work. Now, there have been in the world, before 1983, there was one non-national currency that actually remained from the 1930s in Switzerland, the Wiener. In 1984, there were two. There was Michael's in Vancouver in Canada, and there was the Wiener in Switzerland. Well, something happened. There are now 1,400 communities who have decided to agree among themselves to use something as a medium of exchange. The something varies. It can be little bits on a computer that Michael is keeping. It could be hours, like in time dollars. It can be pieces of paper, like in Ithaca hours. Whatever it is that you agree on could be used as currency. 1,400 people have done this. Now, let's think, among the country that has most per capita of community currency is Australia. The country that's most advanced in terms of government support is New Zealand. The country that has the most in absolute numbers, over 400, is Britain. The country that grew fastest is France. They started with 0 in 93. Okay? Then something happened. It's called unemployment. Unemployment showed up to 12%. Now you have 250. Boom! In 3 years' time, 4 years' time. is what's happening. So there is something, by the way, from an economist viewpoint, this doesn't make sense. This is not supposed to happen. Why should people bother with two pieces of paper when you can have one? Right? I mean, why should you bother with having two systems when one works well? Of course, what they don't know is that the one doesn't work well for everybody. But, at least theoretically, from a conceptual viewpoint, from an economic viewpoint, the suspicion is that this whole thing is a tax avoidance, because that explains it. If you can explain it with tax avoidance, you're in business. You can keep on economics. It is not tax avoidance because the most popular system is LEDGE. LEDGE is computerized. Any tax authority can look at it and take all the stuff off. If you want to do tax avoidance, the last thing you want is have a computer that has all the data. Okay? So, it's not what happened. Now, here's a bit of history to provide perspective on who does what when. As I said in the introduction, this is not the first time it happens. It happened in this country. I'm talking on the U.S. here now. In 1837, of course, in the Civil War, in what they call panics. They didn't have crashes in the 19th century. They only had panics. Now, after 29, we had crashes. So they had the panics of 1873, of 1893, in 1907, and 1930. The two most frequent ones, the largest volumes, thousands, were in 1907 and 1930. Now, what's interesting today, you have this flourishing without a crash. This always happens in a war or in a crash. Today, we have it kind of preventable. Interesting. So keep that in the back of my mind. Why? Now, 1932, that of all the 1930s currencies, there's one that survived. In America, they were all suppressed by Roosevelt in one single stroke when he launched the New Deal. He basically said all these emergency currencies are illegal at the time. And he suppressed them all in one fell swoop and launched a new system. We can talk about why he did that if you're interested. Now, one of the currencies, there were hundreds in Europe as well, one of the currencies survived, and it's the Lire in Switzerland. It was started in 1932 in Zurich. Currently, it has 80,000 members. It has a volume of $2 billion equivalent per year. And it gives a bit of an idea of what a mature system looks like. We have no new mature systems now. I mean, the stuff from the 80s, they're babies in the woods. I mean, they're all a couple of hundred, a couple of thousand is a very large system. You don't have 80,000 members. Okay? This is the exception, but it's the only one that's mature. So if you do this right, and by the way, we had made mistakes, which was, I'm not saying this is the model, by the way, but they did the management, at least, right? The management of the administration part. And so it can be quite significant. Now, in 1982, Michael started the first post-war mutual credit system. We'll talk about more in a few minutes what a mutual credit system is. And in high unemployment area in Canada, both on the east and the west coast. In 1986, I discovered from Edgar the other day, you started the time dollars. And it was first started in St. Louis, in Florida, and in DC. There were three systems in 1986 started. In 1992, you have the first paper currency, pure fiat currency, yes.
I think we can't leave out here, well, for Saudi's important issue in 1972 with the help of Bob Swan of the constant in
yes.
expedition.
They have been, it was a very interesting experiment, but it was stopped.
It was.
I'm talking of things that actually survive today. There were, in the 1930s, there were 5,000. I mean, yeah, the constant was, correct.
The legal limits again.
Correct. That is when the standard was established that you can use anything as a medium of exchange as long as you pay your taxes on profits.
And I think it's still important to
yeah, it's true.
acknowledge.
That's true. That's true. The constant was an interesting experiment. Now, In the 1990s, something else is happening. I call it the age of downsizing. The information age does not require as many people to do growth. Today, the largest corporations in the world, the 200 largest corporations, have exactly the same manpower as they did 20 years ago. It went up and it went down. Okay? But they have 7 times more sales. So their efficiency in terms of sales per capita of employee is multiplied by 7 in the last 20 years.
That includes offshore and all of those.
Yeah. They are currently shedding, the major corporations in the world are shedding about 2 million people per year on a global level. What I find interesting is that in America there's some perception that what happens is that it's exported. Well, I have news for you. It's not exported. It's redistributed, but it's shrunking down everywhere. Okay? You may have a plant that moved from here to there, but from there they also moved somewhere else, and the net result is that, in fact, the full staffing of population, of jobs, is decreasing significantly, and has been systematically. I think that we're seeing the end of jobs, not the end of work. Yes?
You think it's the same as it was 20 years ago for the large corporations?
Yes. The 200 largest corporations have now, that is a study, by the way, this is provided by Grider.
But overall, employment levels have gone down, although they remain constant with the large corporations. So private business, small business.
No, small business has picked up the stuff. Okay? Now, the fundamental point, although, is that growth without jobs is a reality, has been a reality for the last 10 years, 20 years, and it's just accelerating. Okay? So let's be aware of that. Now, as you have joblessness, you automatically have community currencies. I would say the most, it takes a lot of work to start a community currency in an environment that's full employed. Okay? It's doable. Some people are doing it, which is a full employed, I mean, very low unemployment level. But it's hard work. Okay? In France, you can't stop it. I mean, you know, you don't have to make an effort to create a monopoly. They had a monopoly, a legal monopoly on the national currency, and, you know, when there were all these other currencies appearing, they actually had it suppressed, which, by the way, in my opinion, was the key engine to create fascism. When you take away from the people the capacity to organize themselves, what will they do? Well, they look for a savior, don't they? And if they don't have one locally, they'll import it. That's what the Austrians did. They called the Anschluss. You know, to welcome Hitler. Now, in New Zealand, the central bank, the governor of the central bank has a very unusual contract. It basically says that he's going to be fired if inflation is more than 2.5%. It concentrates his mind wonderfully. You know, he suddenly discovers that really the monopoly is not that important. Inflation is. And guess what? Local currencies help in reducing inflationary pressures. Why? Because it enables to mop up local pockets of unemployment without having to lower the interest rates on the national currency. You can keep the national currency tight and pick up the slack in local areas without even have to do something about it. And the politicians don't come and scream at the governor or at the central bank because they're all happily busy. Now, another interesting case is Missouri, and I think there again, Edgar was one of the engines there. Missouri is the first state in the United States to have actually accepted time dollars to fund social programs officially. And now there are 30 states doing it. I think Edgar will talk much more about that later on. So that gives us a bit of flavor of what's happening. Now, I think we should find out there are different, I have been commingling here a whole series of different currency systems that are non-national in the previous graph. 1,400 systems include, you know, different types of currencies. And I think it's important to know what we're talking about. First of all, we have to talk about fiat money. All national currencies today are fiat money. Fiat comes from the Bible, right? The Genesis says fiat lux in Latin, in the Latin version. And it says basically what it meant, let light be. And the next sentence is, the light was, and he saw it was good, right? So the power of creation out of nothing by God of the reality, universe, is what we're talking about. That's fiat money. Now, no wonder you have respect for bankers, right? Because people who can do that are the bankers. Now, this national currency, or any other fiat currency, and by the way, Ithaca ours is a fiat currency, okay, be aware of that. It's created by an authority. It can be an official authority, it can be a potluck authority, but it's an authority. Someone has to decide how much money is issued. It's created right there, out of nothing, by decision. And the value is guaranteed by that authority. In other words, you have to make sure that supply meets the demand of the currency. Otherwise, you're going to have depreciation of the currency. Which is, what, by the way, what central banks do. The central banks are in the business of guaranteeing, trying to keep up the value of their currency, and competing to keep it scarce for everybody else, by the way. That's what's happening. The second concept is a currency that's backed. Now, what's interesting with a backed currency, and there are examples for that, barter dollars is the classical one today, but you also have the 19th century gold standard, okay? The initial dollars were pieces of paper that said that you could get a piece of gold somewhere in a safe, you know, was a convenient place to move around where you didn't have to move the coins. Anybody who owns that commodity or the service is actually the one who creates that money. If I have a stock of gold, I can start issuing pieces of paper. If I have a stock of whatever that we agree on, that is the backing of the commodity, we have the capacity to create by the person who owned the commodity or the service in question. And the value is guaranteed by the value of the product or the service. In other words, an ounce of gold, it's an hour of time, it's whatever it is. But, you know, you have, the value is defined by the product or the service. And the third concept, which was defined by Tom Greco in his book on community currencies, it's a mutual credit currency. Now, there are two kinds of mutual credit systems that we're going to be hearing about, which is Lex and time dollars. They are created by the participants themselves at the moment of the transaction as a debit and a credit. This is what Michael showed you a little earlier. You suddenly said, we agree on that trade, boom, the money is created as a debit and a credit, simultaneously. That's mutual credit money. Now, there are some advantages in these different systems, okay? But the main advantage of the mutual credit system, the reason that I personally like it more than fiat money, is that from a management viewpoint, it's foolproof. You cannot issue too much. Nobody decides. Here, the authority can make a mistake, and typically does, historically, okay? Whoever that authority is. It's very hard to manage fiat currency. This is very easy to manage, because it's not managed. People do it themselves. And when the economy picks up, and there's less need for a complementary currency, what happens? The currency supply shrinks, right? And when there's unemployment going up, the currency supply increases. Exactly in time when people agree on that they need a transaction. That's the power of it. Is this clear? The three distinctions? Yes.
Why don't you have bartering under mutual credit?
Bartering, I'm talking barter dollars here, not bartering. The barter dollar concept is a currency. Barter, one confusion which I guess I should have pointed out earlier, particularly in America, there is a problem with language. Barter has become to be defined as anything that doesn't use the national currency. And that's not true. Barter is very precise. It means an exchange without any currency. Any kind of currency. I exchange this, and you give me this. Now, the main problem with barter, and that's why currency was invented, is that the other party needs to have something that I want. In other words, we have to have matching needs and desires. If you don't have that, you need to invent currency. And that's why currency is invented, any currency. So bartering is a transaction without any currency. Now, barter dollars are the units of account that the barter exchanges use, and they're backed by goods. In other words, I have hotel rooms, okay? I have cars, I have cloth, and that's what I value the cloth at $1,000, and here I have $1,000 worth of barter credits, okay? Yes?
Well, I think it's important to also include the distinction of issuing for productive loans
Yep.
as, and as distinguished for, exchanges.
Well, I'm focusing here on the medium of exchange. That is the focus that I'm taking on. There are other ways for capitalizing, and it's a whole different discussion, okay? So we have to, let's focus on one thing. I think the medium of exchange is a critical thing, okay? At least one very critical thing. When people don't have jobs, that's what happens. They stop having medium of exchange. Just a question of buying their house at that point. We're talking of creating the medium of exchange. I agree, there are other systems.
Yeah.
There are other systems, we can multiply it. And,
Right.
and then we'll be here for 3 days instead of 4.
Stars under,
Yeah.
right, which might sound.
I'm not trying to be comprehensive, I'm trying to be clear. Very often they are. If you really want to be complete about something, usually everybody is still has lost it. At least when I try to be complete. Maybe there's some people who know how to do it better. Now, there is another concept which I'm introducing, which you will not find in textbooks. All the previous definitions, by the way, you can find in books, typically, economic books or monetary books. I call a yang currency and a yin currency, and I'm referring to yin and yang not quite innocently, but it's not to be exotic, by the way, okay? Yang and yin, the reason I use the Chinese terminology is because when you look in the Chinese concept, they look at what links them. We look at what separates them, okay? That is a fundamental philosophical difference, which I believe is one of the problems that we're having in Indo-European languages, by the way. Not just, Aristotle, of course, helped. But, he was based, Aristotle just glorified Latin and Greek grammar to cosmic dimensions, So the Chinese don't have that problem. The Orientals have a yang and yin concept, which is actually always complementary. You cannot have yang without yin. Yang is only yang because it is defined by the limits of yin. Okay? Fine. Now, a yang currency is one that promotes competition among participants. It tends to be hierarchical. There's a boss somewhere. And it's generated by patriarchal value coherence. In other words, it's not quite accidental that for 5,000 years we have tended to have official currencies that were yang. Okay, when they were in governments that were patriarchal oriented. Yin currencies promote cooperation. They are in egalitarian gift societies. In fact, it's just a way of keeping track of gift exchanges, which is different. And it's generated in community situations. In fact, community, the word community itself literally means to give among each other. Ku is together among each other, munere is to give, or mudus to give. In other words, community literally translates as a process of giving among each other. It's important, because what we're saying is everybody is starved of community today. You know what we are starving of? We have killed the gift economies with monetary exchanges on a young currency. Pardon? Most traditional societies, what we call primitive societies, the American Indian societies, before they arrived here, they were gift economies. When you go to the Amazon, people are actually having systems of social exchange where things are being done systematically by gifts. Okay? Actually, it's not just, we still have remnants of that. When a couple gets married, what happens? All the sides give gifts, huh? Isn't that interesting? We try to create a community of a new family by a new linkage, and what we do is create gifts. What's left of our gift societies are the moments of Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's what's left of our family community. Okay? So there is a process, a direct connection between gift exchange and community creation. And there are economies that were completely based that way. One of the more extreme forms of it was the Kwakiutl here in northwestern America, where they had the potlatch. The title of, say, king, or, well, the equivalent of, say, the Prince of Wales, for Kwakiutl would be the one who has given many blankets away. That was his title. And he was very proud of that. Like we say, the Prince of Wales. Okay? In other words, that gives an emphasis. The honor or the magnification of the person was a question of how much you gave away. In our societies, how much you accumulated. There's a bit of a switch there. And the switch has to do with young currencies. Okay? These currencies actually give an incentive to accumulate. It's called interest. By having a lot of currency, you suddenly make more money. You make money with money. Very easy.
Can you develop the relationship between the two countries?
I will come back to that. I'm just giving definitions here, and I'll come back to that in a minute. You'll see why I'm bringing this up now. Now, here is one map of currency types. Okay, and I'm defining unit, issuance, when how it's issued, some mechanics, and the main benefit. Let's start with the national currencies. The dollar, the Deutsche Mark, the pound, and everything else, which, by the way, are all mediated via the dollar. Everything is expressed in terms of dollar. The issuance is by banks, not central banks, by the way, for a little history. The massive, the 95% of all the money that you've seen is issued by banks, not by central banks. Okay? But anyway, together they form a unit that actually creates the currency by loans. Now, it's debt-based. In other words, every single dollar you've ever seen is someone's debt. Was created at the moment of making someone a loan to someone, a bank loan to someone. Okay? It's fiat money, and it bears interest. These are the characteristics. And it has the privilege of being legal tender, which basically means that if you have a debt to someone and you offer to pay in that currency, and the person refuses to accept that currency, you can basically say, good, I void my debt, and I go to court, and the courts will support the fact that I void my debt, because I offered to pay in legal tender. Okay? That's basically what it means. The only thing it means. And you have that in every one of your dollar bills. This is legal tender for all debts, private, public, and private. That's what it means. Basically means that you can force someone to accept it if you're indebted. It's also useful. You need to use it for taxes, for example. Taxes will only be payable in legal tender. Now, let's say the case of Ithaca hours. The unit of account is an hour, and it's typically valued at $10 in the case of there. It's the potluck community center, the central bank. Is a potluck dinner. It's a fiat currency, so careful, you have to manage it. Paul Glover was very good at that. It's remarkable in terms of being managed to manage that effectively, systematically. It's tricky, I wouldn't want to be in his face. And it's very easy to use because it's very familiar, see? It's paper bills. They're little pieces of paper like dollars. And you can put it in drawers and wallets and all around. The second kind of currency, which is the LEDs, we talked about it earlier. It's called the green dollar, at least that's what they call it in Canada. I think they call it that way here too. It's the green pound, actually. But each country has its own denomination. Manchester is the bottom. But what's important is that it's basically tied to the national currency. The unit is the same. It's a mutual credit system. Out of the 1,400 systems, about 1,200 are LEDs. And it's again very easy of use now for the merchant. Why? Because you have a single sign saying $12. Well, $12 equals 12 green dollars and 12 whatever. It's the same thing. Otherwise you need two signs, right? If you had an exchange rate, it was different. Of course, what Paul Glover did is make it easy. You drop a zero. but still, it's the same idea. Time dollars, there the hour of service is the unit. It is again a mutual credit system. One important characteristic is that it's a fixed exchange rate. In other words, an hour equals an hour, which at the same time is interesting from a social viewpoint. It also limits its application in terms of you're not going to find many brain surgeons in time dollars. Okay? So the limits, constituency are different. It's a very simple system. You can start with a blackboard. Okay? It's the simplest of all the systems at a small level. You can start with 20 people, 10 people, and start it on a blackboard without any investment of any kind. It can also be very sophisticated. You have systems running, what, 10,000 people on computer? So, you know, of course, you go on computer as soon as you have a few more than 100 people. Finally, you have one which I just invented for the honor. I call it the ROC, and it's the Robust Currency System. And I'm just picking from all the other systems what is it that makes it most resistant for falling apart. In other words, most robust from either exterior shocks or from interior mismanagement. Okay? These are the two criteria I've been using. The hour of service is better than $1 in that sense. Why? Well, if you're a Mexican, you know. Okay? So if the peso suddenly went down, well, guess here. The thing will go with it. Okay? Now, hour of service is an hour, 60 minutes, so far, anywhere in the world, so it makes it easy to account. Mutual credit, the main reason I prefer mutual credit, you can guess already, quantity management is taken care of, automatically. You can't overissue. Very important. I propose a negotiated exchange rate so that we can have brain surgeons, and basically the only main benefit is that it's a synthesis of most robust features. None of them exist at this point. I want to immediately go on record that this is not existing at this point. But, you know, it can be existing if the people agree on it. It's not very difficult. Not more or harder to do than any other systems. If your purpose is to be ready for a meltdown, this may be important. And in fact, it may also be relevant if there is a meltdown that the existing systems switch to this. Okay? I'm just telling this for people who are familiar with what I'm talking about. In other words, it's useful that we understand what makes it resilient. So if you have a system that is not resilient, where to go. Okay? Now, there's a second map.
Is this all in your book?
There's a lot more in my book. Well, my book is not out. It's finished, I just have to write it. That is what Molière did, by the way. Now, let's take one piece of currency in more detail, and it's a national currency, and the reason I'm paying that one apart, for obvious reasons, because you're going to be talking to people who think that that's the only kind of money possible, right? So it's important to understand what the mechanics are. National currency is fiat currency. It's created by bank debt, okay? Now, what's important is that debt money can only keep value by keeping kept scarce. So by definition, debt money will always have a third of society in trouble, okay? Because you have to keep it scarce. You know, and central banks are in the business of keeping it scarce. Yes. Debt money keeps only its value by its scarcity. So central banks are in the business of creating scarcity. When the Federal Reserve increases interest rates, what it really is doing is reducing the money availability. Fewer people can afford to have loans, right? So there's less money in circulation. Okay? Now, the interest part is also important because it creates structural competition between the participants. I'm not going to go into full detail here, okay? There's a whole fairy tale about this, how it works. If you have questions about it, I'm happy to get into it. But it is not accidental that, for example, non-profits cannot cooperate when it concerns about money. They're happy to cooperate on other things, but as soon as there's money involved, guess what? It falls apart. This is not accidental. This has to do with the money, not with the non-profits. Be aware of that. And it has to do with interest, by the way. People are basically always fighting. There's never going to be enough money around to pay all the interest in. The money interest is never created, basically. That's the bottom line for those who understand the logic on it. Now, the bottom line is that there are two main young characteristics that we have in national currency: centralized control and competition promoting. So I call it a strong young currency in Chinese medicine. Now, we'll see this role here. The white or the yang, the black or the yin, in the classical Taoist symbol of the universe, by the way. You know, everything is yin and yang in completion with each other. Now, in here, you have scarce and competition promoting currency, and here you have fiat authority guaranteed. So when you have both scarce and fiat, that's where we are, strong yang. Okay? Ithaca ours is fiat authority guaranteed, but it's sufficient and cooperative promoting. Okay? Easier to produce it locally than getting the dollar. Back external reference guarantees, here are some of the young currencies which we haven't talked much about because they're not typically involved here, but here are the Lucian credit systems. Okay? The time dollars, the lets, and the rocks. They're strong yen currencies because they're both created by, independent by the participant himself, and always in sufficiency. Now, my main claim is that these two things are actually needing each other. Right? That the two currency systems. To conclude, the strategic role for complementary currencies, the first one is that they need to be complementary. By the way, I mean, just for the record, please do not use the word alternative currencies. You're falling in a trap. You're falling in a trap that will create problems. Because alternative currency means that you're trying to take over the main currency in the people's mind. And you're starting creating competition between them. And, you know, bankers will talk about it as alternative currencies. You better think about it. Bankers want it to disappear. But when you want it to happen, call it something else. I propose community currencies. I propose complementary currencies, the one I prefer, because actually it emphasizes precise that concept. These currencies here are doing things that these cannot do. They're not designed to do that. The time dollar system can succeed where you can throw millions of dollars at it, it won't work. Okay? In other words, they're different things that are doing different things for different people. And the community exchanges are occurring here, called the yin economy. Hazel Henderson calls it the love economy. Here are the young exchanges. This is basically the normal economy. The economists live here and say there's nothing else. Okay? I think it's time that we look at the folk and empower this part. But the purpose is not for this to take over that. First of all, you will not succeed. Okay? It won't happen. And number two, I think you're creating a problem for yourself. The things that these currencies won't do, that this is necessary. I prefer to buy my car and my computers from competing companies. Okay? There's a purpose for the young economy. So, yes?
What did Great Evaluation say that the water was in greater demand and reduced in Germany before it was satisfied in the United States? Is that what happened?
Well, they had several systems in Germany. The Wara was one of them, was one of the more popular ones. It is a complex question, by the way. It has to do with Schacht, who became the head of the central bank of Germany after the meltdown of 26. Okay, and I mean it's an interesting character. Okay, and he was trying to do the right thing with the knowledge he had, and he was a very good central banker from a classical viewpoint. He was called Hitler's magician because he managed to turn the whole place around economically, quite remarkable. But he did it by crushing the local systems. And he did not intend to support Hitler. That's what's humorous or funny about it. He was a Democrat, politically. He said that he got into bed with Hitler to try to control him. Of course, the opposite happened. That's another, I mean, we can talk about it later. It's a complex question what you're asking. Now, so that's the first point. Please remember, what we're trying to do is complementary to the main economy, not in competition or replacing for it. The second one, and I know that some people in the quote-unquote alternative economy don't agree with that. They say that we should take over, and I don't believe that's realistic, and I think it's really counterproductive. The second main thing, the third strategic role, is that we really should understand that complementary currencies are only the tip, the visible tip of an iceberg. That there's a lot more going on below it that is usually not seen. And it's grassroots activism. Out of 100 grassroots activists, successful groups, one starts a currency. Okay? At least until now. Let me explain what I mean. By the way, this information comes from Carolyn Lucasmeyer, who was the head of America Speaks, and who did a survey for 2 years. She toured the United States and tried to find out what happens in communities. What's happening to activism? And she found something very interesting. In 1960s, compare the 1960s with the 1990s. If you ask anybody, is there more activism in the 1960s than the 1990s, you're going to have the answer of 1960s, right? Wrong. There's more today than that, but it's different, and it's not visible, and that's the key. In 1960s, it was national, okay? It was about main things like against something specific, racism, the Luther King thing, Vietnam, okay? These were national issues, very visible, single call, highly media coverage. This was covered by television every day, this stuff. Okay? Today, it's all the opposite. We don't have national expansion, we have local stuff. People work at their village, in their community, in their area. They're not interested in being against anything. They've given up being against something. They're looking for solutions. It's not single cause. It starts sometimes with one cause, and immediately at the third meeting, they end up with 20 causes. Okay? They end up with, you know, we have to take care of the education, we have to take care of the elderly, we have to take care of the trees, we have to take care of 500 other things that we didn't think about at the beginning. And the visibility is absolutely not existent. The low media is, once in a while it's talked about as part of these kind of funny things. The little line at the end of the show where you basically say, no, there's funny people happening, there's actually people making money out there, you know? Isn't that cute? You know, it's kind of, they ran out of dogs that were crushed or something. You know, that's the feeling. So the media don't talk about it, and therefore it doesn't exist. But my main point is that we have a lot more activism going on now than we did in the 60s, and it's different. And out of this process is really what is arising. The community currencies are arising out of this process. People are finding solutions to their multi-cause problems on a local level with that currency.
What's the name of Lucasmeyer's book?
She doesn't have a book. She doesn't have a book.
But there was a name that she gave to the process.
Yeah, she was the founder of a vital, well-designed, that can hold the road for the long term. We may be into this for a lot longer than we think. Okay? This may be another lifestyle. So better do it right. And of course, I can also forecast that if someone blows up a local currency, it's going to be over the press. Okay? So there's a lot of interest to say that it doesn't work. Be aware of that. So it's important to do it right. I believe that we even have the possibility of showing that other systems can work. And when the main system, if the main system falls apart, which I do not hope for, by the way, I really pray that it doesn't happen, because there will be an extraordinary amount of suffering on a global level, plus a few wars and other stuff that we don't even know. Last time that didn't happen. We know where it starts, we don't know where it ends. So, but it's possible to demonstrate that other systems are doable. The fourth point is, if you really think about it, that of all the possible tools that we have to influence change, on a social level, i.e. the way people interact with each other and interact with the environment, I claim that money is the most powerful that we have. And it's funny, we don't think about it as a tool. We consider it a given, and we don't really think of changing it. We're living in, the image I always have is, it's like fish in water. If you try to explain what water is about, the toughest people to explain it to are the fish. Why? They live in it. Only flying fish have an idea, you know. And, and the other ones don't believe them. Okay? Well, you're flying fish, and what are you doing? Be aware of that. I think that the social age can be for a more balanced and equitable and nurturing system that actually counterbalances the other one. I think we have that possibility. Finally, I think it's important to mention that, particularly with some of the founders of those systems are around here. I think the most important thing that we can do at this point is finding ways of cooperating with each other. This is not a competition to find better systems. My system is better than yours. All these systems have value in particular niches. If a community can agree on one system, let it be, whatever that system is. Find ways, however, to try to cooperate. For example, make local convertibility agreements. Okay? This is already happening in Canada in several places. They're happening in Britain. It's starting to happen in France. You know, where when you have a critical mass of local systems, well, how about when I go, to Southern California, I earn credits there and spend them there. By the way, it could be Southern California or Southern Mexico. Huh? I mean, it's the same process. Yes, borders don't count. Yes.
I find that a little confusing because I think one of the reasons for promoting the local system is to keep your resources local, and once you start transferring them, it becomes very equivalent to the national currency.
No, it's not.
You don't lose that stuff.
It's not going to do that. Because each one, when I say convertibility agreements, it doesn't mean that you're going to export your currency and they start using it elsewhere. We're talking of making it possible for people to make a trade with a system that's another system. I understand the reasoning you're talking about. It is valid to a point. I think the main value of a currency is that you find trades to do it with. And if you have more people that you can trade with, you're going to have more value for your currency. Okay? So, and the power of the communal complementary currencies is the fact that they're created by mutual consent and therefore are not scarce. That's where you have your cooperation working. That's why it will never be equivalent to the national currencies. They're not young currencies. They will spread complement cooperation, not competition with it. I have a last proposal, which is in fact going in that direction. The fastest growing economy in the world now is the cyber economy. In 1997, it was $36.7 billion that were traded on the net. We're going for the year 2000, a year and a half from now, 2 years from now, to about 200 billion. Okay? This is much faster growing than China was, by the way, in its heydays. Okay? It's doubling every 6 months. Now, there is a market there for jobs, for work. And I don't see why each community could not have, I have my community, and I have my computer. And I make a trade, and I earn my credits of my currency on my computer through a clearinghouse, okay? And then I can spend it for X locally, or vice versa, okay? You could supply services on the net that you wouldn't be able to supply, say, translation jobs, okay? And you can earn translation jobs, and you get a credit. The other person, say, is in Manchester. Well, she will pay in bobbins. But the clearinghouse enables you to earn whatever your local currency is. You always earn your own currency. And the clearinghouse keeps the book balance. There would have to be some limits on it. You can't have, there will be maximum amounts outstanding of any one of the systems. Each one of the members' organizations could be here. You can talk about whatever. But it basically is a strategic alliance with the netizens, which is another group of people who are interested in change, in social change, We're pioneering it right now, which we could use and make an alliance with. That's it. Any questions? Arbitrage is defined as a negative interest rate. In other words, instead of receiving interest on your currency, you're paying interest for leaving it in the form of currency. Such systems have existed in the past. They existed, for example, in the 30s. There were a number of systems in Wordle and others that actually used it with stamp script, it was called. It existed in the Middle Ages from the 10th to the 13th century and existed in Egypt. Now, the main advantage of the Mirage charge is that it provides an incentive to trade. It provides an incentive to use the medium of exchange only as medium of exchange, not as store of value. Okay? You can still make savings, but you will not do it in the currency. You will do it in something other, a tree, you know, an irrigation project, whatever it is that you want to do that actually has a real product out there that keeps its value. That's the way it happened in the Middle Ages. That's the way it happened in Egypt. So the Mirage charge is a very, very interesting concept which you can very easily do with electronic money. All the forms of electronic money, including the Let's and the Time dollars, by the way, could have the Mirage charges on it because they're all electronic. Very cheap to make it operational. And I claim that if we have the Mirage charge currencies, you're going to have a very different interaction again among the people, which is in fact very productive from what we're trying to achieve from the yen viewpoint. Where store of value is completely gone from the medium of exchange. Yes?
I'd like to end this.
That is not reassuring. And that's why I think we should be concerned about finding alternative solutions.
And what's your forecast for complementary currencies in the world?
I think this is one of the most important social innovations that we have right now. In fact, I believe it's going to be one of the major social innovations for the 21st century because it will enable the creation of work instead of jobs. And work is basically people doing what they like to do. And jobs is what you do in order to make dollars. And there's a lot more work to be done than there are jobs. So work can be done with complementary currencies. Jobs can only be done with dollars. And dollars are going to be scarce.
What's the best three examples of complementary currencies in the world today?
Time dollars, Let's, and Edgar Hours are all three have some value in each of their niche. I think for social management purposes, for large-scale projects, I think Time dollars is very good. Let's is very good for decentralizing grassroots organizations, and Edgar Hours fits very well with the existing system in terms of using pieces of paper. They also have limitations, and I think, you know, we're still trying to improve any one of the systems. There are a whole bunch of them that I haven't talked about, which are being done right now. The Tlaloc in Mexico is a very interesting example, which I didn't mention, because I don't think it's applicable right now here. But, you know, there are other currency systems that are currently being designed by people who are being social innovators today, and I would be very interested in hearing about them and learn about them. Great, thank you.
Any other thoughts on the currency conference or where all this is going?
I think this is very encouraging that these things are happening, because I believe that we will need a lot of people to become aware of what's doable, that people can take care of their own problems in their own way much more effectively than trying to obtain solutions from central government. And I think this is a realization. I think the process of social activism on a grassroots level is gaining steam. And I think because of the economic constraints that we're dealing with, I think it's going to become more and more important. In fact, I'm proposing to the European Union to do exactly that in integration, at the same time introducing the euro to legally support community currencies, because I think it would be useful.
From a standpoint, there's a big difference between apples and oranges. And this money, if you go down to the farmer's market, you can't buy any oranges, but you can buy lots of apples. So by people agreeing to use this money, it automatically puts them in a mind state where they start thinking about, how am I getting my needs met? And am I getting my needs met in a local way that is more locally, is often more environmentally friendly, is more, just has a lot of social benefits? We probably don't need to go into that. Or am I just blindly spending my money and getting it done just in a sort of blind way? And this is a great way. This is why there's like over 300 businesses involved in the ISCOUR system, because they want people to see there's a difference between the local place to buy books and a huge chain bookstore. And they want people in this sort of, so that's another big theory of this, is that it encourages local spending. Okay. Let's see, the other theory, all right, how do I say this? And that goes the other direction too, is it encourages businesses to use the local money to pay their employees, and they often can pay their employees more in local money than they can in federal money. Like, for instance, I got involved largely by working for an orchard, and they would pay me 1 hour per hour, because they knew probably by the end of that season they would get that exact piece of currency back. Whereas if they paid me federal dollars, I'd send it off to Geico or something, they'd never see it again. But they knew I'd go buy oranges, and they'd never see it again. So it encouraged, by the local currency, it helps perpetuate itself. The dollars never leave town. They keep staying here in our town and keep us hiring each other. So the other thing that happens that I found in Ithaca, a community of about 50,000 people, is that beyond just am I spending this money or that money, is that we're actually making connections within the community. And we're finding out the faces behind the businesses that make these things happen. Remember how I started and I said, hey, I can do this and you can do that. Well, if you're just going down to the generic huge store and just buying your stuff, you never really see, oh, that person has that skill and this person has that skill. And that's what I think, to me, is one of the most powerful things about this local currency, is that we have this directory. It costs you $1 to be in this directory, and say I spend 30 hours of my week working as a carpenter, but maybe some other things I do on the side. It costs me $1 every 2 months to put a listing in here that says, you know what, I also do, Hebrew lessons, or whatever, horsemanship, all kinds of other things you can find in here. And this gives a face to me that gives me a value besides just my job and the job that I'm given in the larger society. This gives me a face as a person, and it gives other people a face as a person, so that we know that you can get these things done and you don't have to be employed by somebody else to do these things. I don't know if that quite makes sense. But in a way, it's what we're talking about, is building a safety net, in the sense that maybe dollars won't work, maybe hours will, somehow, I don't know, somehow this won't be the ultimate system if there's some kind of meltdown or whatever, if there is or not. But the connections I've made with people, to know that this person can grow apples and that this person can do roof repairs, those last, no matter what system. And the hours really help build that kind of community and help build that kind of support. And some of my relationships that started out in dollars, and then I got involved, and then the same relationships were in hours, now have gone just to barter and friendship because of making the real connection. So that's what it's about. It's not about what you use. It's about getting the things done that can be done and need to be done. Okay.
My name is Edgar Kahn. I'm founder of the Creative Time Dollars, and let me simply say that you can't get a much simpler system than saying 1 hour equals 1 hour equals 1 hour, and that's the basic unit of account and that we built on. I think that just by way of informational introduction, that there are a couple of quick things that need to be said. One is that we do have a web page, timedollar.org, that the software for running the system is available from download free at that web page, that time dollars consistently, I believe, has been the only currency that the IRS has consistently ruled is tax exempt, which means it has no negative impact on welfare benefits or on your rent if you live in public housing, and that's made a difference. That there's been a consistent determination both locally and at state levels, and we have some national rulings from, at least opinions from lawyers, that earning time dollars satisfies the work requirement under the welfare law, so that, God forbid, by helping your neighbor, you can keep your welfare benefits. We think that the best and highest use of a mother may not necessarily be commuting 4 hours to the suburbs to be somebody else's maid. I know that's a perverse view of value, but nonetheless, we think that if the collective workforce can be invested in rebuilding community and rebuilding families, that maybe we can begin to get a handle on some of the issues of poverty and deprivation and abuse that exist. I think that if I was going to try and say, how do we relate to the other complementary currencies that you're hearing about, most of the complementary currencies that I've looked at are really attempts to bring back community into the market economy, to take out the global, depersonal, mass-produced piece, to bring back a sense of personality, individuality, a sense of relation and belongingness to the market economy. I think that to the extent that time dollars has a sphere, it's much more saying we need to redefine as work the work of a second and invisible economy. Economists will admit that about 40% of value that's never gets measured but's in there was produced by, within the family, within the neighborhood, within the community, wasn't monetarized, doesn't exist to economists. And that whole second economy, up until recently, was really carried virtually free or at cheap labor, thanks to the subordination of women and the exploitation of minorities and immigrants and children. As we move out of that era, and hopefully don't want to go back to it, the jobs that remain to be done still remain to be done. Families have to function as families. Neighbors have to function as neighbors. And so the question becomes, how do you redefine and value as work the work that was done and desperately needs to be done, whether it's taking care of the elderly, whether it's learning, which we don't pay for, whether it's taking care of children, whether it's being a neighbor or a citizen or caring about one's neighbors. We think that that's real work. I see, frankly, no way of giving that value within a monetary system that incorporates traditional pricing. Traditional pricing values what's scarce and what makes money and devalues what's common and universal, which means we will never give significant value to caring, loving, decency, learning, citizenship, neighboring, until they get so scarce that, like bottled water and filtered air, we pollute human relationships enough that we got to buy those. I don't really think that's the way I want to go or the way we want to go. And so the question becomes, how do you redefine as work the capacity all of us bring to give to each other, caring, loving, learning, neighboring, citizenship, the kinds of things that we all want to promote, so that where time dollars comes in is it's a currency that says everybody has something to give of value to another human being. We've added a couple of strategies to implement it, because we found out that there are folks who will pay the administrative costs for time dollars who won't, frankly, pay the administrative costs for helping bring a community dimension to the market economy. And so we have the school system of Chicago paying the cost of administering a time dollar program where 1,000 kids are tutoring other kids in 10 of the worst schools in the Englewood area of Chicago, and those kids, when they earn 100 time dollars, can buy a recycled computer. We think that there's enough plenty in this country, enough capacity, that a tax-exempt barter currency can, in effect, be used to give everybody sufficient purchasing power that everybody can eat, live in decency, have a roof over their heads, if they're willing to spend some time, God forbid, helping another human being. We don't think that's too big a price to pay. So we're saying that a barter economy is a way of redefining work and conferring the status of work on work that we took for granted and got for free because of conditions of subordination and exploitation. Now, one of the things that we're learning is that every government agency that deals with a problem, every community group that deals with a particular social problem, every foundation-funded project always tells you that the one thing they don't know how to get is something called community participation, citizen participation, consumer participation. It may be residents in public housing whom they're trying to get to participate. It may be students and families in schools. It may be patients in a healthcare system to support each other. It may be 12-step programs. But everybody says, we don't know how to get that and sustain that. And we're saying, well, one way to get it and sustain it is to call it work and to pay for it. And if you can't pay for it in dollars, and there are reasons why we think the dollars will never be available, we can create a currency that drives that, rewards that, and affirms those values. So in D.C., we told the courts, you know, you're failing with youth, you're turning them into polished criminals faster than a gang in town. So we got them to set up, authorized time dollars to set up a youth court with jurisdiction over all first non-offenders. And lo and behold, we've had almost a recidivism rate below 5%, and kids dealing with other kids tell them off and tell them how stupid they were when they got in that BMW because they knew that wasn't owned by that friend of theirs, and maybe they better start thinking about their friends. We don't have a place where kids say that can win points saying that to other kids unless we create that kind of a culture. In public housing, we're running a food bank. We buy 4 tons of food a month for $100. This country has surplus, folks. That 4 tons of food is not as good as what's given away, but that 4 tons of food generated 78,560 hours of people helping people, reducing violence, and some of the people earning that were not in the labor force at all, as we can get. 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds were the breadwinners for their families. But they began to create a different culture that reduced violence. So now, instead of earning time dollars, looking out and using your phone and the beeper system to tell people when it's safe to come back from a grocery store down Alabama Avenue, now those time dollars are being earned with kids attending story lessons and looking and playing, and other kids overseeing the playing that goes on. I'm simply going to say that we're now working with community groups to set up community time dollar temp agencies all over the country because we want to redefine as work. We want people who are on welfare to show that they are contributing, to be able to show that they are productive and contributing, that the market economy may have no use for them, but we sure do have use for them if we're going to keep families together and if we're going to enable seniors to stay out of nursing homes and if we're going to keep violence down and enable schools to work. I think the only other thing here in California is we're aware that this may be the only currency that can be earned by undocumented labor. And I don't know how they're going to live, and I don't know how we're going to live with the prospect of starvation if people who want to contribute and want to work can't work. But the IRS does not view this as money because it is not backed by a legal obligation. It is backed only by a moral obligation. It is returned to the true gift society. And the IRS doesn't acknowledge the existence of moral obligation, so we're okay.
Michael Linton. I'm from Canada, originally from Scotland, which is a good place for an economist to start. I've been working in this field now since 1982 when we hit the what Bernard Ricard as a panic or a crisis. There was no money in our community. That was significant to me. Certainly there was none in my family, so we had to look at stuff, and we did. And we've been looking at it consistently then since '82, and we're having a lot of fun. And I think the core thing I'd stress is that there are so many answers to this issue that it's really quite ridiculous. There was a line I was thinking of an analogy of if you take a bottle half filled with water and you shake it up, you've got a bottle half filled with water, and it's still shaking. If you drop a bit of soap in there and shake it again, you get some bubbles. And then you shake it some more, and you get some more bubbles. And you shake it some more, and you end up with foam. And essentially, we're at that procedure at the moment. There was an old ketchup line: shake, shake the ketchup bottle, first none will come, and then the lot'll. Now, essentially what's happening now, and by now I mean over the last 6 months, maybe the last 6 weeks, maybe the last 6 days, is that there are transitions occurring which have that lot'll effect about it. The key issue really is connect. Only connect, Forster said. And the issue of a community is connectivity, and what we are creating is connectivity with these methods. And in so many ways it's ridiculous. I got two real beauties here, one of which is a real beauty and largely insignificant, except that it is the first precious metal circulation coinage struck in North America in quite some considerable time. It's from an island in Vancouver area called Lasqueti Island, which has no hydropower, has no car ferry, and it deals in ounces quite a lot. And so their coin is an ounce, half ounce of silver. It's useful for weighing things, if you know what I mean. So I'd like to pass these around so you can take a look at it. And I've got samples of this in pre-proof editions, if anybody wants one of them. It's got $5 of silver in it, and it passes for, well, it's got 1998 written on it, which is maybe a date, but it's maybe a value. With 2 cents, it's 20 bucks, right? So that's one of them. This is the other, and this I think is one of the most significant pieces of paper. This is the Tlaloc, which is a Mexican currency, which is basically backed paper. And this is a beauty. And we've got a lot of this, and if you want samples of this, come back to me as well. Pass that around. That one is very significant. That's the one that's going to crank it through the cities and through the third world and all sorts of other sectors. My own background in this came from, as I say, deprivation and poverty, the mother of invention. But when we looked at this process, the place we looked first was into the U.S. commercial barter networks, as they were called. As Bernard pointed out, they're not barter. They're a monetized transition between trading organizations. And they're very substantial. In fact, last year, I believe that the reported volume of trading in the American barter networks was about $20 billion. Now, given that about 10% of that is trade commissions that go into the operations, that means that about $2 billion of earnings were made by people working in community currencies in the United States last year. Hands up, anybody who got a piece of that action? I mean, as an operator, has anybody been running in that? See, we're dealing at a penny ante level. You know, we're playing around with $100 here and $100 there, and can we afford to print this, and can we afford to do the other? And for some 30 years, since the mid-60s, commercial trading networks have operated in the United States, which are identical in form and style to the LETS system, with the one distinction: they're run for profit in cash, and ours are run at a community level at the cost of providing that service. But that's a measure of what we're looking at. You take the VER experience in Switzerland, 2 billion per annum, was it, or 20 billion? 2 billion, 80,000 accounts. It works out at $25,000 per account per year. Now, are any of us operating at this level? No. The lead system in my own community has been operating up and down, to and fro. Very interesting. About the only form of currency that can die and then revive itself. And our system sort of went way down and started up again. But it's only got about 300 or 400 people in a community of 60,000. And most of them don't know what it is. And I'm not able to explain it to them. I have to come down here and explain it to you guys. So there's a lot of changes coming. They're coming fast. We'll be talking this week about a program we got called Community Way, which is very, very powerful. You've got paper on it in the handouts. It's in the manual, the big book that was prepared. We may, in fact, be starting a project in San Francisco fairly soon with this. I say we, but I mean other people will be providing information and support services to it. If it was to come off in San Francisco, it would raise $5 million for community charities in its first phase and produce an operating budget for its developers in the tune of $500,000 US. So we're talking about a different scale here, and I hope you'll appreciate the purposes of these things. I won't go into the details of the LET system particularly. Anybody wants to know about it, you can see it. It's just like another bank. Use it like another account. You start at zero, you can go up, you can go down. But the money stays in a loop. That's all there is to it. We use currently an accounting system. We are not averse to adding coinage or bills. We're actually more interested in going towards smart cards because they apply for the multiple function. Remember when I said about shaking the bottle up and down, you know, you get all this foam? Well, what that implies is that, for instance, in a place like the Bay Area, there won't just be the Bay currency, or even the Oakland or the Bread or the Santa Rosa or whatever. There will be thousands and thousands of currencies in the Bay Area itself. Most of us will carry 5 or 6 of them. We'll have our regional one, we'll have our locality, we might have a church one, we might have a school support one, we might have one for women's issues, we might have one for environmental issues, we might have one for the Little League baseball team. We'll have dozens of them. And most businesses will have maybe 15 to 20 systems that they accept currency on. And they won't do it in paper because their tills would look like a total mess. But they will do it with smart cards, and they will do it with direct accounting systems. And this is coming very fast. In fact, I will be very surprised if it's not in major function within 6 months. And we're hoping for something a lot quicker than that. So things are moving quickly. Now, within that context, in the last minute and a half, good news and bad news. Give you the good news first. The Americans are coming. The Americans are coming. My God, nobody in Canada does anything until the United States does it. We were down here in the 80s, and we ran into the tax and privacy issues. You guys have got a Spanish Inquisition in the place. It's called the IRS, and you're terrified of it, with good cause, I do admit. But it's led to a complete lack of local currency development here until recently, when the propagation of the Ithaca Hours model started things really moving. I mean, not disregarding Edgar's development, of course, in a different area. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is the Americans are coming, the Americans are coming. Oh, boy, you guys are so rapid and fast and eager and not always quite on the ball. The bad news is that the way that the scrip issue is going at the moment is potentially disastrous. Bernard referred to the fact that an overissue is a disaster that can happen. It only happens once. You overissue a local currency, it's gone, gone, gone. And probably take down a whole bunch of others with it. That's the bad news. The good news is the fix is so easy, it's ridiculous. So there's no panic with this. It's just an issue that has to be handled. You guys have got to get backing behind your script. And that Plaloc note that went round is the perfect example. It's money that has people's name on it, because then responsibility exists. Responsibility and accountability are the keystone of the community. Without it, forget it. You'll get blown away like a paper airplane, like a paper hat, like a paper Titanic. Do it right. Now, in case you don't see what this is about, I'll refer to the biggest single instance of a community currency that worked on this model in the last 30 years was Ireland. In the mid-70s, the Irish checks were signed and moved around the country. It ran for an entire year. The economy was better, there was less fraud, and there were no bounced checks. I mentioned this at a meeting in Dublin. The room went nuts for about 10 minutes. They were just all laughing and cheering and remembering what had happened. So the one guy when the banks reopened, he had to move fast because his desk drawer had 25 million pounds of checks in it. And his checkbook, he'd written 23 million. So you got to see that one time you're sort of walking across Niagara Falls on a thin tightrope, you know. That's when the banks are there to pull the rug from under you. The other times when you get clear of the banks, the tightrope's very easy to walk on. So that was just a broad discourse about getting backing behind money. It will work. And I hope we'll have more discussions about that. Thank you.
Local currency system in western Massachusetts that started actually in 1991, the same month as Ithaca Hours, but the two systems were unbeknownst to one another. The reason they were unbeknownst to one another brings up some interesting things is a group of women employees at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst had been getting pay cuts and staff cuts for 5 years running, and they were desperate. They were being overworked, underpaid, and they were most of them had families to support, and it was a very tough time, so they came together as a group to figure out how to help each other. So they tried bartering. They put up a list of things that people could offer and things that people could needed, and they started bartering. But then they obviously came across the limitation of barter is that lack of simultaneous what's the term for it? Not having that match between what's needed and what's offered. So they developed their own currency called resource pool credit, and I have a sample out in the hall. It's a little tiny thing. They gave each woman 500 of them, and they were worth $500. The reason they did that is they said that that's about the amount of money that we have not been paid by the university this year so far because of budget cuts. So they said, we're going to give ourselves a pay raise, or we're going to keep our wages the same, and they generated a list, and they started trading in earnest, and they again came up with another block. Well, there was only so many goods and services available within this network of women, which was about 20. So then they started adopting families and friends who had these things to offer into the network, and they gave them 200 resource pool credits. And before long, there were, over a couple of years, there were 70 participants. And the reason that it was kept small on purpose, because they thought that what they were doing was illegal. So they only sponsored in people they knew who could keep the secret. Then Gurnam Khalsa, who was the coordinator of that system, discovered the Schumacher Society and discovered Ithaca was doing the same thing and had been since November 1991, totally unbeknownst to each other. And I take that as a sign of synchronicity, and I'll talk about some other synchronicities that happen in my next piece. That system, when Gurnam and the women there found out about Ithaca, they went up and made a field visit, and they said, gee, this is legal, it can happen on a bigger scale, what if we had more goods and services available in the pool, wouldn't that be great? It so happened that myself and a colleague, Tony Savdier, were graduate students at the University of Massachusetts where this was happening. I didn't even know about it, and I had been there this whole time at the campus where the currency was circulating. So it was very, very close. But the women came back from Ithaca saying, let's expand this thing. So I happened to connect with Gurnam, and I had just been hired as a VISTA volunteer in the northern rural county of Franklin County, and had put together a study group on local currencies, and using Tony's master's thesis, which was on the Ithaca Hour system, as one of our guides. And anyway, we got together and we said, we'll form a new organization, Valley Trade Connection, and we'll print a new currency, a region-wide currency called Valley Dollars, and I always keep them in my wallet because too many people keep them in their drawers and forget they have them. And I want this back because this is worth $1, and it's an expensive trip. Now, the Valley Trade Connection operates very similar to Ithaca. Again, a remarkable coincidence. We have our directory that's published twice a year and a monthly newsletter. This has about 800 listings in it. We've issued about 60,000 Valley Dollars since the beginning. What we did is we did a remonetization process. We took all the resource pool credits and gave people 6 months to cash them in for Valley Dollars 1-to-1, and we gradually reduced the exchange rate so that by the end of a year and a half, a resource pool credit wasn't worth anything. You couldn't trade it in for Valley Dollars. So about 14,000 of our circulation is in remonetized resource pool credits. We've done a lot of We've had a lot of energy in our system to try new things, and I think it comes with a warning, meaning that if you're going to be doing one of these projects, I strongly suggest that you stick with your core competency and your core program, and then grow out into other things. And I'll give you 2 examples. One is I worked with Robert Gallant, who's here tonight, who was a founder of a LET system many years ago, and which was basically to assist retired folks, elders in the community, to exchange goods and services with the larger community. And that ran into some problems. And when we started coming up with our model, Roberts jumped back into the fray and said, I'm still interested in this stuff. How can we work together? Just that time, Robert had experienced, his agency had experienced major budget cuts that funded the companion program, which matched community people with elders who were living in their homes but needed someone to come and do the, you know, the snow shoveling and take them to the doctor and the sort of things Edgar has talked about that are so vital. I mean, if you don't have those, nothing else works. So what we did is we made a grant in Valley dollars to Highland Valley Elder Services to pay companions actually more than they were being paid in U.S. dollars. They were being paid, I think, $3 an hour for being a companion, 2 hours a week. We upped it to $5 Valley dollars an hour for 2 hours a week. And we made about 12 matches. And some of those matches are still going on, and new ones are being made. Now, the other problem is, other thing that happened was that the following summer, we had a lot of unemployed teens on our hands in the hill towns where Robert works. And we said, gee, what if we matched these teens with these elders and paid them in Valley dollars for the summer? Well, we did that, and what happened was that we discovered that where teens like to spend money was not the kind, they weren't the kind that took Valley dollars. We're talking, you know, Friendly's restaurant, the local cinema, the mall, the athletic shoe store. All of these were not locally owned, and we had actually a retired accountant, a woman who went out and tried to recruit these people and met harsh resistance. They wanted nothing to do with it. They either said, we don't make those decisions here, you have to go to Syracuse or Arkansas, or we just don't want to bother with this stuff. So what happened is those kids, we had a great pizza place that took 100% in Valley dollars, and the kids had a lot of pizza. But at the end of the summer, they had a lot of currency sitting in their pockets, you know, they weren't able to spend because everyone else in our system wasn't taking 100% Valley dollars, and they didn't have any U.S. dollars to match it with because they were cash poor. So they got stuck, and their parents got pissed. So we learned from that experience. I'm going to tell you, the next piece is we also forged right away an alliance with a commercial barter association called Barter Association Western New England, and it had about 250 members within our area. They were concerned about us, you know, us taking over their territory. So they said, let's have a reciprocal agreement. Our members will take Valley dollars 1-to-1 for barter credits, which are on a computer and can be used for vacations in the Bahamas and, you know, a truckload of tennis rackets, whatever you want. And vice versa, their members could use Valley dollars to get the sort of things on the local level, the massage therapy and the local restaurants and other kinds of things that weren't available in their system. So we've done that. We continue to do that. They went out of business, and another barter association took them over, a local one, and we're doing that again. That provided a great overflow because what was happening was there's always going to be places that people bring their local currency to. Restaurants are the big one. And Paul Glover discovered this with the Moosewood restaurant, which got deluged with Ithaca hours when it first started taking them, and then quickly freaked out and dropped out, and they've never joined since, I don't believe. We needed to give things to these businesses that we couldn't provide within our little network. So for Amber Waves, which is a restaurant in Amherst, to be able to take its Valley dollars, go to the Commercial Barter Association and get its menus printed was a great way for them to put their Valley dollars to work, to get their electrical fixtures put in when they moved, to get the place painted, to get some plants. They were able to take that overload that they had, which would have meant that they would have dropped out of the system because, you know, you don't want to be taking more money you can't spend and spending it with the Commercial Barter Association. And members within our Valley dollars group, some of them were able to spend a lot of volume, $1,000 a month, in Valley dollars, and they would gladly cash in their barter credits for Valley dollars and spend them back into our system. So we had that confluence that Mr. Leitner was talking about between different models. And that's where my last point is, have people heard of Milton Erickson? Dr. Milton Erickson, he was a developer of hypnotherapy, among other things. Remarkable man, very early into cybernetics and a lot of the community thinking that we now think of as new. He was doing this in the 30s. he said, I develop a different theory for every client. And that's something I've really kept in my mind. I took a seminar, a graduate seminar in his work, is that every model that we develop has to be locally appropriate. And I've worked in the third world extensively, and I know this from the fact, you can't take an American model and impose it on Zambia or impose it in urban Ireland and expect it to work. I expect people to take ownership of it and move it. Everything has to grow. I think we can take some of the models that we've been talking about, Let's, Ours, and so forth, and develop hybrids. And one exciting hybrid that I want to tell you about is Woman Share in New York. It's a group of purposely just 100 women. They've taken the Let's accounting system, the time dollars hour for hour system, and the catalog of goods and services, and created this group of women that's really building community and getting a lot of things done from all different social classes within the city. And that's the other piece. Small is beautiful, you need the big too, but you need to know what scale is appropriate. I hear a lot of talk already tonight about mature systems, you know, $2 billion a year. Well, and community currency, the VEER system is not a community currency, it's a national supplemental currency system. Let's make sure when we talk about currency, we're talking about community currency or something else. Because when you start getting into that level of trading, on that larger scale, you start to lose the very reason why we start these systems, which is to rebuild community and get things done at the local level, helping people be producers. What you do instead is create commercial bar associations which help move truckloads of tennis rackets for cargoes of oil. And I just would suggest that when you get to that scale, you lose democratic local control, you lose environmental appropriateness, you lose the social connections that bind us together every day in our trade. And that's what gives the money value, is the connections we have. It's about relationships. If you ever read a book by Mr. Bloom in London called Money, Mind, and Matter, I think it's called, he talks about money. The only reason money exists, barter, everything boils down to one thing: relationship. It's all about relationships.
Very good. The part I want to say, and then I'll move on to the rest of the panel, is the currencies really are about values, and I think part of that came out the values of community, and actually all of economics is about values. Economics, if you look, I guess we're into root words today. Oikos is one of the root words of economics. That's the word for household. And economics is about the relationships and the rules that we have for dealing with each other in our household. Our center is very, very concerned, and the reason I'm here, we're very concerned that the current monetary system pretty much only rewards the top 20% of those who either with wealth or income in our society. And the rest of the society has pretty much been left out of the benefits of the monetary system, and in fact, because of the debt system and other things, is actually preyed upon by the money system. And so if you think of, well, how come I'm getting 7% or 8% returns on my money, it's because there's somebody somewhere in an inner city neighborhood that's paying 20% interest to a bank, to that same bank, on a credit card that was given to them because they didn't have enough money to make it to the end of the month so they could pay their rent. And so that's, our center comes from a very solid position of economic justice and is looking at this as theoretically as well as practically as a way for people to begin to build up more equity and capital in low-income inner city neighborhoods. And I'm also a minister, and so I gave a guest sermon at one of our big Presbyterian churches here in the Bay Area 2 Sundays ago. And I used the passage from the Bible about how you shouldn't charge someone who is in need interest. When they're in need and come to you for help, you should give them the money without charging them interest. Well, that sounds pretty good, and everybody was kind of there nodding their head, but everybody in that congregation charges interest on their money because they see the money as a way to make more money. So
it's not as easy to get these ideas across as we think. So I think that's why this theory panel is here to look into some of the different ways of doing it, some of the different ways of articulating it, what sells, what works, what's working when we're trying to explain it to people. So that's a way of trying to introduce a panel talking about the theory of something that in fact is a very practical issue in our society. So with no further ado, I'm going to move on, and we're going to go in order, and we're going to try to keep our minute to maybe 5 to 10 minute presentations so that we can have time for question and answer and get some dialogue going. And I will turn it over to Erica. And we don't have amplification here, so you're going to have to either stand up or boom out, or
Okay.
each one of you, okay?
I thought we were starting over there.
Yeah, in the order listed here. Yeah, you're first. You want Susan to start?
Sure, yeah, it's fine.
We do this just to drive the mic people
I was very impressed with Bernard Leiter's presentation and want to thank him for it. Also thank Jim Masters and Al for putting together this conference. It's one we ourselves would like to put on, but it was a treat to come instead to one. I'm Susan Witt. I'm Executive Director of the Schumacher Society. I'm also co-editor of Local Currency News. And we've been promoting local currencies since 1980 when we started the Schumacher Society. One of the things I'm also grateful for is all the various types of local currencies that are represented here, because experimentation is one very important thing that keeps the ideas going, keeps them mobile, keeps the education process going. So just that very engagement in the process is part of what is educating a wider and wider community about local currency. And thanks to all of those grassroots people working in their own communities. Each community, the currency takes on a different shape reflecting that community. That is also one of the wonderful things about working locally. In 1930, as Bernard Leiter pointed out, at the closing of the banks in this country, there was much experimentation. One I know of from personal report of someone in our region was in Springfield, Massachusetts. The local newspaper, Samuel Bowles was head of it, and he saw that there was a shortage of funds of currency to pay his workers. So he issued a local script from the newspaper to his employees. That was, the employees were to use them to shop in the businesses that advertised in the paper. So it come back full circle. However, what actually happened was when merchants would have federal dollars or local scrip in their cash register, and someone would come up and he'd say, the person at the register would say, which would you prefer, Bowles's money or the federal dollars? And the Springfield people would say, give me Samuel Bowles's money because I see him every day and I have confidence in him. And so that local script kept circulation going of commerce at that time. One of the people who most influences our work is Jane Jacobs, a great regional planner. And I'd like to recommend her book, Cities and the Wealth of Nations, especially Chapter 11, which remains one of the best arguments for the need for local currency. And in it, Jane Jacobs, as planner, says that she's seen that there's the development of all of these elephantine cities. And as a planner, she's concerned about that because she would rather see a diverse group of products available in each region with a diverse amount of types of businesses. And this diversity creates the quality of life that she as a planner is looking to help achieve.